one of the big things that came through in my research was all the women were kind of, first of all, I put ads in the paper, because at that time it was like, I don't know, 15 years ago. No, not that many. But anyway, whatever it was, that group I did put stuff on websites as well, but I put it in like Seniors Are Us or whatever the newspapers were, and just like bombarded by people to participate in the research, and just, launching into their stories the minute I picked up the phone. And then I chose my women because I needed them to, identify as circumstantially childless. And all of them said the same thing, I've never shared my story. Why are you interested in hearing my story?
Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast with Sarah Lawrence, Berenice Howard-Smith and me, Michael Hughes. And if you're new around here, our goal is to explore the reasons why people become part of the childless community and the issues specific to us. This episode, we're joined by Dr Naomi Menahem, whose research dives deep into the lived experience of circumstantial childlessness, navigating the subtle cultural stigmas, the unspoken expectations, and the complexities. And she brings profound insight and validation to stories that too often go unheard. So let's find out about Naomi. Naomi, tell us who you are and what do you do?
Well, I am Australian, coming to you on Bundjalung country in Byron Bay, and I work as a communication consultant, but I guess the reason that I'm on this podcast is I spent over 10 years finishing a doctorate that started as a very seed of an idea to understand why I didn't have children, and had various different ways that I could go to make sense of that, and I decided that I ended up in a PhD stream, and very grateful for that experience. So thus the doctor.
Awesome. Now, there must be more to you than that. Come on.
What else do you need to know? I ride bikes, very avid cyclist, do yoga. I don't know what else. I'm 100% migrant, as you can tell by this hair. My mother is Czech and my father is from Singapore, but a Middle Eastern blood originally, and they both came to this lucky country as migrants. So I was born here as first-generation Australian. Born in Melbourne, spent 20 years in Sydney. Now I'm in Byron. So, yeah, you have to ask specific questions.
And we know you because we've met you at Storyhouse.
How
Sarah
lucky was that?
I know. Wasn't that amazing? We had a fantastic
It was great.
time. It was really good. So you're an in-person podcast person, which makes you extra special. And you spent quite a bit of time with Michael recently as well over on...
I did. We did. So all of the in-person conversation have completely inspired me. Going over to Chester.
Chester, yeah.
I knew I was going to get that wrong. And just spending 2.5 days in the presence of others, just talking about all the things, and everybody was there to have the same conversation. And then picking that conversation up in person with Michael completely inspired me. And I've just launched a nub of an idea, which I know we'll get into a bit later, called Childless Conversation, an in-person opportunity for people to come together and talk about how it is to be childless. It's very cool.
So, Naomi, firstly, let's talk about your research work that got you your PhD. So, why did you specifically choose women from 60 to 75 to research?
I guess, so where it started for me was I wanted to try and make sense, as I said earlier, of how it was that I became or remained childless at the end of my reproductive years. I come from an Orthodox Jewish background. My mother's side is all Holocaust surviving. My father's side has a different story, but also persecuted. So, the only expectation, I'm the eldest granddaughter, the only expectation was to get married and have kids. That was it. There was nothing further. My grandmother told me when I turned 21, we don't have 21st. I don't know if it's a cultural thing in the UK, but 21st is a big cultural thing. You get the key to the city, don't you, Michael, in Australia? So we don't have 21st. We have engagement parties, you know. So that was it, like one path. And so here I was, probably about 45, 46, going, didn't have kids, you know. And so I started to get curious about it. And I went on many, many different paths and ended up in a doctorate program. The reason I wanted to, so there's probably, I'll take two paths. One is the academic path and one is the personal path. I'm really in awe of and incredibly respectful of elders, and I think what they have to share. So it was always to speak to people ahead of me, women ahead of me in their lives, you know. And I guess not that I was allowed to do that academically, but you know, I kind of had this perception that all childless people were miserable. And so my hypothesis was that all childless people were miserable and I need to prove or disprove that. Well, of course, I couldn't do that. That's not allowed. But it was something that I sat, I guess, in my own psyche in some way, that we were, you know, that I was a failure, that, you know, I wasn't deserving, that I, you know, all of this internalized, what I realize now very much internalized pronatalism. And so I wanted to talk to people ahead of me in life to see how it was for them and did they get through this and all the things. So that was the personal reason. The bonus to that was academically, when you write a PhD, you kind of have to prove the gap that you will be filling, so that you get government funding in Australia, studying as a doctorate. For a doctorate, as an Australian, is a free pursuit, so we don't pay any university fees. And so I needed to prove that there was a gap in the literature. And when you have a look at the elders that are, so women out of their reproductive years, most of the academic research is done with women in their reproductive years, which is kind of counterintuitive because there's academic research that says that women make changes, you know, circumstances change, they are infertile and then they can have, or they meet someone or whatever it is, they change their mind from never wanting and then they do have. So it's kind of counterintuitive that you would study that cohort. And so there's very limited research with elders. And what's terribly sad about the research that's done with elders is it's pretty much set up to prove or disprove that they're all regretful, incredibly remorseful, and a huge burden on society. And so that's really the lens that older women are kind of tainted with. So that was the reason I kind of from both sides, from a personal perspective, but then the bonus was that academically there was a gap, so it was an easier path to take as well.
I know it's really hard to get funding for doing childless research. So was it hard to get for you as well? Like, was it a really tough gig to get this over the line?
So I was very lucky. I mean, I accidentally stumbled on Melissa Graham, who's probably the number one academic on childlessness in this country and has participated, and I think she's gone globally known. So, you know, like I said, I stumbled into this arena. I had wanted to do something on, I wanted to do a Master of Philosophy and for my writing. And anyway, it all just kind of merged, which was incredibly amazing. And I was doing a Master of Marketing because, hey, you know, childless people are overperformers academically often because they have time. So I was doing a Master of Marketing and I went into the academic library and I downloaded a whole bunch of articles on childlessness, academic articles. And I just put them away, you know, and kept looking. I put them away. I kept looking. And I picked up an article one day, and it was basically on the number of times Julia Gillard, who was then the Prime Minister, had been her reproductive status was inappropriately attributed to her political standing. And Melissa Graham and a number of her colleagues had done that research, and she was the first academic. And it was over 600 mentions in 3 months, which is quite extraordinary. I rang Melissa because she was the first name, and academics have all their details published. I pitched her the idea, and she pretty much picked it up. We then needed to, she was very supportive of it. We then needed, she was at La Trobe University at the time, at Deakin, and then we finished it at La Trobe. We then needed to pitch it I needed to do what's called confirmation of candidature. So I pulled together a 10,000 word pitch where we identified all the gaps, and you present it to kind of the leaders, academic leaders of the university, so that it's accepted and that they believe that it is a worthy contribution. So that took me about a year to pull together and identify the gaps, which is one of them was around researching older women. The other was Australia does not have a huge proportion of academic research. It's quite limited. And then obviously the third part of the wheel was around circumstantial childlessness, which is very, very limited in its research. So between the three, I pitched the idea of doing this research and all of the aspects that come with it. And also phenomenologically, there wasn't a lot that was done. A lot of it was quantitative research, surveys and the like. So actually hearing lived experience. So yeah, after about a year, I pitched and pretty much got accepted on the spot. So that was very, very cool at the time. So it did get the funding, but it took me a long time to actually pull together the actual document that and the presentation that actually then was presented and accepted by the university board to do.
Oh, thanks for that. Hey, you developed the concept of the deferral iceberg. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So one of the great benefits of interviewing women who were able to reflect back on their reproductive journey was that they had the benefit of hindsight as well, which was, again, a bonus. So I was able to plot then the pattern of how they basically got to become childless. And one of the traits that came out was this idea of deferring. So circumstantially childless women, certainly in the women I spoke to, and then it is backed up in the academic literature, there's this kind of moment of hesitation, and that moment of hesitation can take a journey right through to menopause. It does come off as well. So at 40, some women, after they kind of waiting for the right circumstances, can decide to actually not have kids, not for them, or the circumstances are actually right. And so they try, but unfortunately become infertile. So they end up in the two other buckets. But this process of deferral, and so the way I saw it was I described it as an iceberg because we present, me too, as, as people normally talking about, the circumstances weren't right. I wanted to, I wanted to wait till the right person came along, or I wanted to just get the next job raise, or I wanted to travel the world first, or there's many discussions that we kind of talk about. But what I recognized was that underneath there is what I call kind of the subconscious that sits there, that kind of sits also at play. So some very conscious reasons that we talk about, but subconsciously there's a whole bunch of activity that's going on that is probably causing the deferral all the way to menopause or until, the branching off. And for my women, they spoke about it in three ways. They spoke about the fact that they didn't have the drive, and they got curious about that. It was a term that they used. And they compared themselves to other women who at the same time were like, leaping over small buildings to have a baby, and or spending all their free time in shops looking at baby clothes. And, and at that time, it was in the 60s, and they described, that one of their friends ruined a good man's life, because they met him, had their children, and then left him. So, it was done because you couldn't have kids on your own. And some of them expressed this kind of, they just didn't have that same drive. A number of others talked about the need to be free. Of course, this was the time when the pill was just coming in. They saw very repressed mothers, and so this place of like sexual freedom, and I could work. I don't have to procreate. All the things, and so that was certainly going on. And the third piece that they talked about was often, they said, I had my first child when I was 12 because they were the eldest and raised, their half a dozen siblings while their parents were at work. And so that is what was sitting underneath, operating at a subconscious level. Now, this wasn't necessarily where my women went. Some spoke about, maybe I dated I kept having dates with the most inappropriate men for a reason. And I'm doing a webinar for World Childless Week. And I have met a therapist, Sebastiana, who talks about the trauma that often sits underneath. And I don't want to go into a big story around that now, but that is how I describe the iceberg. And certainly, when you think about social exclusion and stigma and all the things that that people who don't follow the pronatalist path, it's no wonder that we present in a particular way, but there could be a whole undercurrent that's happening underneath that we don't necessarily want to express or know to express. So that's the deferral iceberg. God, I'm giving you very long-winded answers.
I just wanted to comment. I don't have a question. Michael's doing I love the questions, Michael. But I just wanted to say how much I really love that visual as someone who is a visual, and I do doodle notes and things like that in other spaces, and how much I just love the way that you've described that and how striking that is as a visual for me. But actually, it would probably be very, very striking to people who are childless, child-free, all those complexities, and that. I know we've inferred on a couple of podcasts before where it isn't quite so cut and dried as it's this. As you say, there's lots of different reasons why people subconsciously may struggle or not quite know why they're thinking what they're thinking. And the media, other people, who are presenters, experts, mostly parents, I have to say, who know someone for whom everything worked out. It's really hard to unpick it. There's so much stuff that goes on in the media, I think on social media, algorithms that feed stuff in that make it quite hard. So to actually have a visual, I think, that one could present and go, look, actually, it's like this. And actually to draw that up and say, this is an iceberg, because there is that common iceberg, I think, graphic that goes around where it's kind of like, and this is what's going on the surface. And it's mostly around mental health. But actually it translates so well and so perfectly, I think, to actually childlessness. I think that's amazing. It's all there in my head. I've built up a visual picture of what that might be. I suspect some of our other listeners will do as well. So thank you for sharing that, Naomi. I really love that.
My pleasure. It's kind of the top of the iceberg is what we present and what we're okay to share. The bottom of the iceberg is nobody's business. And, even the top is not anybody's business. But, it's kind of the expectation that we have to kind of give a reason why or have a narrative around it. But, it's, yeah.
And I like that boundary, that visual boundary, as you say, the top of it, really actually isn't anyone's business, but definitely what's beneath is what people can't see is absolutely, that's not for question. It's for reflection and it's deeply, deeply private. Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
I've got another one.
Go for it.
So So you coined the term robust pragmatism to describe how women navigated their lives. What distinguishes that from just simple acceptance?
Yeah. I think there's a real... So the literature does talk about acceptance as a term. I think there's a real resignation in the word acceptance. That's my lot, I accept it. My women, which really surprised me, and it's not all, I did do 15, and we're talking about a bell curve, that there were some at either end. But I was really taken by a few things. They spoke about... They did speak about, just getting on with it. And I interviewed them all individually, but it became this kind of warrior cry of like, I'm just getting on with it. I'm not wallowing. And some of them took real, they really took, what's the word? Where they were really kind of perplexed by the fact that they were even called childless. They took umbrage to being called a childless woman. That is not how they saw themselves. And they got really kind of uppity at that society has to judge us by our reproductive status. Like, who is saying I'm childless or you're not, or what? When are we all just going to be people? Why do we always get reduced to our biological and reproductive status? And so they were really kind of robust in the way that they just got on with it. Whereas acceptance, I don't think some of that languaging and some of that kind of pushing back against the stereotypes and the exclusion and the absolute horror in which, some of them were presented. One woman spoke about, one Christmas party, meeting somebody, and this woman, they were talking about it, and she said she didn't have kids. And then the woman's daughter came over and the woman who she just spent like 10 minutes speaking to, said, oh, this is so-and-so. She's really selfish. She didn't have kids, and it's like, what? And so, my woman was like, just absolutely wanting to punch somebody at how inappropriate that statement was. So that's where I got the notion of robust pragmatism, because they were extraordinarily robust in the way that they got on with their lives and the way that they were refusing to fall victim to the way society supposedly saw them. And they were incredibly pragmatic in the way that they just got on with all the things and had a great life for the most part. They were incredibly proud of their achievements. They were, had great hobbies, and I never want to go down the path of birthing anything, which is something that, gets thrown at us. I birthed a PhD and all the things, and isn't that great? And, that's kind of my baby. None of that sits well with me, and I'm not suggesting that for 1 minute they saw that as a comparable, but they did say that they were able to see that their maternal instincts were expressed in other ways, they still had sadness and regret and remorse and all the things that we feel, but nonetheless they had full lives and they were absolutely getting on with it and living those lives. So that's where that term of robust pragmatism, and they really taught me a lot in that, to say I am me and the rest of it actually doesn't matter. So I was very inspired and very touched by that.
If the topics in this episode chime with you, you can get in touch with us on social media. You can find us on Facebook, Insta, LinkedIn and Blue Sky, and we love your feedback. Childless Not by Choice listeners can carry on the conversation with us in our safe place at the Full Stop online community. For more details on how to join and to claim a free month trial on us, please visit www.thefullstoppod.com. We'd like to give a huge thank you to the current members of our awesome online community, because it's down to them that we can keep the lights on for the podcast and look forward to giving back to the childless community as we grow. I wanted just to bring Sarah in on that, because I'm just thinking, I had a question and I'm not actually even sure that I can don't have the words to ask the question, but there's something rummaging around in my head around the work that you do as a counsellor after the storm. And I'm thinking about how that robust pragmatism, how all of this coalesces into that healing space. And I'm wondering if how does that sit in terms of kind of pathways that people take, and where research affects counselling, and where does that cross over? Maybe that is actually my question. Where do the two kind of coalesce? How is Naomi's research here and her words chiming in terms of the work that you do, if that's okay to ask you that?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was sitting here smiling because actually I was recognising that I never have a phrase for it, but acceptance always sounds incredibly passive, and it doesn't give credit to the amount of work that it takes to get to the point that you feel like, actually, I carry my grief with me always, but I am nevertheless able to find joy or find something else in other areas of my life. And I see that a lot with my clients as we work towards it. There's always this feeling of, I've got to get to acceptance. I've got to get to this thing, as though it's like some sort of chalice that's almost impossibly out of touch and you can never really get there. But as I work with clients, you tend to see that sort of robustness coming in, that kind of, they can sit with their grief, but at the same time they can go, do you know what? I've started to notice this, this and this. And it's a real shift. And I think what I found myself smiling at was that it feels quite hopeful, I think, rather than saying you've got to get to acceptance and you've got to, it looks like this, that and the other. And it often doesn't. It's just I accept that I'm going to be carrying my grief, but I also see that I can have all of these nuanced feelings about the other things. And I think it feels more hopeful, actually, having that, seeing that generation above us sort of going, yeah, I still carry my grief, but actually I've got this and my nurturing comes out in this way, and I do this and I add value this way. And that's what kind of one, it sort of lit me up a little bit, because I can see that in my clients quite often. When you feel that you can feel like, yeah, they're getting ready to move on now. It's that little spark that they start to find again in life. And it's really quite lovely. And I kind of got the sense that you got that from speaking to these 15 women. It was almost like it felt light. It felt hopeful.
Yeah, and it's not to say, the other word that we played with, which I really like as well, is that they had a sense of agency. They weren't going to be defined by the way other people saw them. And it's not to say that they didn't carry the emotional spectrum that we carry. That's not what this does. That doesn't dismiss that. But it's saying that is true for me, but I am not going to be defined by the way anybody else sees me or describes me, and it really is empowering in that. And that was more, and that's why acceptance is, you better accept your lot, whereas, this agency, and I really like they were practical in the way that they then got on with all the things. Yeah, so between the two, it was, and like I said, I came in with my hypothesis that all childless people were miserable, and so not that I never expressed it, it never got written down. I completely was unstructured interviews. I was never part of anything. So to see this come out and it is spoken about in the literature, but in particular against the academic research that was casting this shadow on the elders around being a burden, which is Gail Latherby talks about this, or they just collapse. They're going to be in our social systems. They're going to rely on all of us to carry them through, poor childless elder women. And nah, not my women. And certainly not that the academic research does absolutely say that it's not actually the case, and they are not a burden, because as we all know, there are no guarantees your kids are going to turn up and help you anyway. So yeah, I think that's so. Yeah, Sarah, it was lovely to hear that that's what's seen, because it isn't that all of that isn't true. It's not about going, and now I'll be happy. I've dealt with all of that, and now I'm just going to put a smile, and I'm going to never get, whacked by the head if I'm in a situation unsurprisingly brought down and all the things, is just say I'm getting on, and I am not going to take your pity. I am not going to be seen as a victim. I am not going to be judged. Don't call me childless. That is all your terminology, pronatalist culture. Go away. And I really appreciated that.
I love that so much. Feeling like I want to get out there with it. I've always done that more, not less, to be fair. It's always been, I think, a turning point, and I think that maybe perhaps out there listeners might be thinking, oh, what's that for me? And I kind of feel like sometimes we have a thing in the community which is celebrate your wins, and they can be the smallest of things, but actually progressively they can really add up. It's kind of almost like this kind of like board. It's not leaderboard or anything like that. It's not gamified, but it's that thing of, oh my gosh, look, I've done these things. And they might just be sort of little things, but goodness me, I think it's incredibly hopeful to hear that, damn algorithms again, they tell us stuff that we necessarily aren't true.
Naomi, I'm curious now. We can cut this bit out, but I'm really curious to understand what did you get out of this? How did this affect you, your work?
In a million different ways.
You don't have to answer that, and we can cut that out. But
No, I'm happy to answer it, and it's published. I had to. It was interesting because Gail was one of my examiners. God bless. That's why I'm a complete maniac. But she originally, I wrote in third person because that's what I was told to do. And her work, as you may or may not know, is very autobiographical, and she talks about the impact that the research must have had an impact on me. I must have had an impact on the women I interviewed, and she was an examiner basically to get it passed. I changed all her and the researcher to I, which was incredibly powerful, that I did this and I did that. And then I had to, she wanted me to then talk about the impact that it had on me and then the impact it had on my women that I assumed it had. And so I'm happy to talk about it because the impact was significant, way more, than I had ever anticipated. I think, and you can decide whether this is interesting. Of course, you can cut all of this out if that's the case. But I think, we're talking now, probably about 12, 13, 14 years ago. I think Jodie was just starting to talk. There were a couple of others that were just starting. The ecosystem was like this big, right? Unlike it's quite robust now. So there was really not a lot of reference. Blogging was big at the time, and I thought, maybe I'll blog, maybe I'll, So I had no clue. I really didn't know it was a thing. I'd read a little bit of academic and that was it. All my friends were married and kids, it's just no reference at all. And so I start on this really naive journey. And, there were I just remember sitting, because it was usually Sundays that I would do the PhD. And I remember sitting and reading these articles and, I'm touched in this moment, and I just remember being overwhelmed going, oh my God, no wonder I feel like I do, or I had no idea, or, just reading how it is for us, and at times, and the social exclusion and stigma and pronatalism and, Australian culture, and we pay women to have kids, and how it is for me in the workplace and being on maternity leave. And, I've done 2 maternity leave covers. I mean, what was I thinking? While they went off and had their babies, and, I've got it for you. Let me, I had no clue, how many, what are they called? Baby shower things that I contributed to, and, but no, how many Easter parades I had to leave early for, and I'll stay and work late, just so not in my realm that was actually impacting me. I always describe it now as being the frog that was slowly being boiled. I had no clue of the field that I was living in and that was affecting me, but until I would just sit on those Sundays and go, and read. And so it affected me in look, it affected me in understanding. I'm not an expert at all, but just having a bit more peripheral vision on why it is that I have felt at times and continue to feel at times how I feel, marginalised, not seen, silenced, quiet, all of that. How outraged I can be now. If I always talk about a workshop I went to on menopause, and I remember the woman, who's been in women's study forever, talking about the 4 stages of, when we first bleed, and then when we give birth, and then when we, go through menopause, and we had to go and journal about that giving birth and how it was for us to have children, and, 10 minutes. And anyway, straight up with the hand going, whoa, 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 whoa. There are some, and I just absolutely lost it. And other women came up going, thank you. And, I just remember people in the audience who were, pumping at the time because they had newborns or whatever was going on. Everyone was saying, yeah, but, haven't you had a plant that you've raised, or haven't you, birthed a project, or, I was like fire was coming from my nose. Isn't it like 70? I didn't know any of them. And I was outraged, right? And then, Jane came up to me at the end to a credit and said, I said, how dare you? How dare you ignore? You should know better. No, I am outraged. So that's how it changed me. I get it. I absolutely understand why I didn't have kids. Completely understand that. So that, that was the main reason to go on the journey. I understand that. I understand about circumstantially childlessness, and I've become a super advocate on that piece specifically. And I now, so it has changed me. I never thought that I would become an advocate about anything. I never thought that I would have a voice. I never thought I would have a reason to be on a podcast. And now I can't kind of unsee what I've seen. I feel incredibly grateful to have had experiences to go to Storyhouse and be in community and see how it is. I think for me, the last piece, and I've just had a brain fart, I can't think of what I was going to say, but it has absolutely changed every fibre and I am way more conscious of how pronatalist a culture I live in, how I internalized so much shame, my sense of failure, all the things around that. I'm very aware of grief that has come on late in life. I'm just very aware of all the things, because at the time I sort of didn't really know the journey I was going on. It was really academic. And then, here I am 10, 11, 12 years later, and feeling privileged to have gone on the journey, and feeling privileged to understand it a hell of a lot better than I did, and feeling privileged to have a voice now to hopefully just stretch open a little bit more, and give voice to be another voice, I guess, in a world that is so silenced.
Oh, thanks for that. That was I remember you telling me that over the drink we had at the pub that time. It was you were much more animated, and I was expecting a few swear words there, but you didn't come through. Oh well.
Sorry about that. I can do. Do you want me to just list them now for you and just take that out?
I think what's really insightful about that, actually, that is a kind of like something I've noticed, is that how that fire can actually inspire so many other people. That you take one person that speaks up, other people get courage from that. So there's also that parallel of not being alone. As we sign off with a podcast, you're not alone and people aren't alone. But there's also that infectiousness about, okay, Naomi spoke about that. That's great. Okay, I think I could do that. And it goes off. And I know that I've had moments of anger in meetings or in spaces, and I've talked about how that feels, because there's that whole narrative of don't be angry, women, you must not be angry, and I'm just like, oh fuck that, oh sorry, I'm swearing now, there you go Michael, there's your swear, fuck that shit, I'm being angry. And I've noticed recently, and this is like a little moment of hope for other people, is that someone I know who is a parent, and we are really good friends. I really like her. I met her through my business as another freelancer, and she went to a conference, and it's a really big conference for business owners in Newcastle. And she stood there sat in the audience rather, listening to someone talking about what it's like to run a business as a mother. Well, it wasn't about that, but it kept coming in because that's her lived experience. And actually, this person I know, my friend, who I know listens to the podcast as well, is a parent. She turned around and she went to the owners, immediately to the organisers, actually in the audience, and said, you can't do this because this is really unfair. You are thinking, and she is thinking, that everybody in here actually has some connection with parenthood, and actually that is statistically not true. And she said to me later, she said, I just sat there, she said, and I thought of you. And I thought, how the hell would you deal with that? And I just said, well, actually, I get angry. And I said, I'm really glad that you got angry too on our behalf, because actually that solidarity and that sharing of, this really fucking is not on, I think is really, really important. That contagiousness, I think, and speaking about how it feels can lead to some really interesting acts of solidarity too, outside of the childless and child-free spaces we can. And actually, I've advocated for people who are child-free as well. It's not how I identify, but I actually will talk for other people as well if I see that bias. And I think that is incredibly important, that cheerleading others and supporting them in other demographics. I think it makes us wiser and more inclusive in other areas where people struggle as minorities as well.
Yeah, I was just talking to a friend of mine who's childless man, Michael. I mentioned you to him, and obviously he's been right through my PhD journey, and I was saying I'm doing this podcast, and he said, I've got to tell you a story. And he was flying, he travels the country for work, and he went to the airport early, tried to get an earlier flight, and the woman, the check-in lady, said, oh, your family's going to be so excited for you. You are going to be walking him just around bath time. Yeah. There's nothing on his profile that says anything. It was just this how excited he's, and he it was like, I'm sitting on the phone because we spoke 3 hours ago, and my mouth is dropping, and he is ready to lunge at her, and because it is just him at home, and he just said, thank you. I'm incredibly grateful that you got me on an earlier flight. I come home to nobody, but I'm extraordinarily tired, and that's fantastic. So thank you for getting me on that earlier flight, but your whole story and the assumption you've just made, So she, backtracked and all the things, but yeah, God, I was like, you've got to be joking. What?
Yeah, that's terrible. I've literally drawn to the floor. There's so many stories I think we could share about places like that. I've erupted in white stuff in Cambridge about being asked about Mother's Day. Literally, it was like 0 to 60 on the anger scale in about 5 seconds. This is not good. But it's really good to hear that. Your friend, that's awful, and in such a public space as well. That's not good at all.
So, talking about advocating, you've got a project. Tell us about it.
So, one of the, it's funny because, I spent about a year or so after I graduated, wishing and hoping and having this idea. And then suddenly about 3-4 months ago, I found my voice, and I now just can't shut up, to be honest. I'm ready to just get with a big megaphone somewhere. So thank you for the opportunity. So I guess it was, so the project is called Childless Conversation, and it's had many iterations of names, but that's where I've landed, and I think it feels very right. One of the big things that came through in my research was all the women were kind of, first of all, I put ads in the paper, because at that time it was like, I don't know, 15 years ago. No, not that many. But anyway, whatever it was, that group I did put stuff on websites as well, but I put it in like Seniors Are Us or whatever the newspapers were, and just like bombarded by people to participate in the research, and just, launching into their stories the minute I picked up the phone. And then I chose my women because I needed them to, identify as circumstantially childless. And all of them said the same thing. I've never shared my story. Why are you interested in hearing my story? This is the first time I've spoken about my childlessness. The literature talks about being, how silenced we are, and all the things. And I keep hearing, certainly it resonated. You interviewed somebody from Melbourne, that gentleman. I can't think of his name now. And he spoke about not having anywhere to share his story before, and this repetition of being silenced, and then going to Storyhouse, which I would eventually love. My big, hairy, audacious goal is to create a Storyhouse on this side of the world. Weekend, obviously, it wouldn't be called Storyhouse, but it would be called Childless with some brand next to it. But baby steps first. And so I wanted to create a forum. And after going to Storyhouse, I decided that I really wanted to do it in person, because what I loved about it, and I guess I'm going in different ways, but what I loved about Storyhouse was that there were the formal conversations and there were the informal conversations. And I love the duality. I loved that we were rallied together in front of whatever it was that we were doing. And, it was described that I drew it, I collaged it, I listened to plays, I listened to talks. Childless was just, I sat in a circle with you, Sarah. There were many forms that we were able to, that we had facilitated conversation about childlessness. And then we would go out in the breaks and have dinner together and talk about other ways that we expressed it, and informal conversations. And so I really wanted to emulate that on a tiny, tiny scale. And so I developed a concept called Childless Conversation. And it is basically a conversation. So it's basically real talk. It's not a therapy session. It's not support group. I'm not a therapist. I kind of emulated it on 12 steps, which I love. You come with your stuff, you hold your stuff, nobody interferes with your stuff. You just do your stuff and you have a conversation and you have shared lived experience. And that's kind of enough. And so, and I'm a cakeaholic. So I decided to do it over tea and cake. It is just for women at this point, Michael, because I don't know enough about the male lived experience. So I thought I'm going to start small with women. Starts tiny in a tiny regional area like Byron. And I tested the first time with friends, and 7 women came together, and who were very excited because they've heard me banging on about this for a very long time. So they were cheering and came, and we had the most fun talking about all the things. And then I put it out a little bit further, and I've had one more, and now I've got another one coming, and I've put it out a bit further. And basically I do it semi-structured. So I'm a big believer in the power of journaling, writing whatever gunk you want is in your mind. And for me, it brings you into the present. So I'm not really interested in qualifying stories, and you don't need to identify in any particular form. Everybody comes with whatever lived experience they have. And I'm very curious about what is influencing that lived experience in this moment, and the last time we met, I just had another great niece. Well, she was, and that created a whole thing for me. My brother just had another granddaughter, and, the family just got bigger and my life got smaller, and super present for me, and that was what was on my page. And that's what I spoke about. None of the other stuff, And then we, you know, everybody shares, and then I brought another piece. There's this kind of a bigger piece of journaling that we reflect on, and we have cake and we have tea and we chew the fat, and there's huge laughter and there's big tears and there's everything in between, and it's a conversation, and it's just loosening some of that silence, and it's loosening some of that internal kind of story because we don't know where to share it. And this is a safe space because everybody has the same lived experience of being childless in a pro-natalist culture. And so how is that for you, you know? And for some people, I mean, I've had a lot of childless people go, you know what? I need to talk about this. I'm not coming. I love what you're doing, but it's not for me. And then other people who have said, yeah, actually, or they've come twice and gone, I'm done now. I feel good and I might come later. I want to keep going on a monthly basis. I am thinking about, I mean, ideally, I'd love to travel the country and do it in every, you know, capital city and do all the things, but baby steps. And I may or may not do it online, but it was very important to me also to keep the space neutral, in the sense of whatever comes is okay. So we can talk about regret, we can talk about joy, we can talk about freedom, we can talk about the fuckery that exists around us. You know, and one girl said, you know, why is it on every date I go on, the second question is, do you have children? And it's like, what? Why? Stop asking the question, you know, and I've banned why questions anyway. So we talk about all of the things. And so it was really important that I kept it broad. And so I'll bring a nuanced piece in each time just to create a little bit more structure, and basically be open to see where the conversation goes. So that's my tiny, teeny project that hopefully will grow to become something bigger. We'll see. One woman at a time.
Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. Because so the conversation we had was about you getting your big girl pants on. So it's really, really good to see.
Terrifying. When you put something out there and go, hi, people, remember how we're all silenced? Here we go. I've got something. And like crickets, nobody, nothing, like nothing. And you're like, oh my God, I'm just sit in the trust and sit in the, you know, it's a process, but the big girl pants are on and I'm going to keep going for the moment.
Awesome. That's so good. It's great to see.
I think that's it.
Yeah.
It's a funny thing that we've found with the things that we've done, and I'm sure it's true if everybody was, I think, completely open and overshared. It takes a while for things to get going, and people land where they land. But what I think is great is that there are choices where people want to go and turn up and do different things. So
amazing.
It's just kind of patience and teasing it out, and I'm quite sure that this podcast will be a massive part of kind of building that awareness, and I think it's a fantastic thing to do as well.
Thank you.
I wish it every success. I just wanted to share, we've actually got a comment as well from our audience to say that they found it fascinating to listen to, and how inspiring you are, Naomi, as well. So that's amazing.
Thank you.
Of course. So yeah, that's from our audience. I'm sure that from our audience out there, after the release, will also find it equally as inspiring. Yeah.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Naomi. This has been wonderful.
Yeah.
And great to see you again.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Brilliant.
I've so appreciated the opportunity, and oh my God, we made it happen. I'm so excited.
I know.
And I got to see you guys and do all the things. So cool.
I know. It's funny, isn't it? You meet people. I always say sometimes, you know, and it's rarely been the experience, rarely ever happened, but sometimes childlessness isn't always the glue that we have together. You need more than that. But I think what's wonderful is going out and seeing other people and meeting other people in person. I think is really just so lovely to have that real connection. as well. And I do remember meeting you, Naomi, in person, and just being
likewise
so thrilling to meet people that you've got so much in common with beyond childlessness. It's like a thing that arrives somewhere later. And I think if anyone's listening to this and thinking, oh, I want to go to Story House, or I want to go and do this, or turn up and go meet people, whether that's actually in person or whether it's via communities like our Stop community, other places are available, then I think it just adds another level of just richness and nourishment, I think, to our spaces, the way we hang out as well. So it's just lovely to meet you. So many things wouldn't happen if we didn't build these connections and talk a bit more beyond childlessness and move forward and think of other things that we can do to inspire and empower others. I hope our listeners will come away feeling inspired to do something. And if you do, tell us, because you might come on the podcast. We need to know.
Absolutely. But no, it's been amazing. I love listening to your research. It sounds absolutely fascinating. I think talking to people I find it so fascinating hearing other people's stories, and we do need to hear them, isn't it? Finding your words and talking about what's happened to you is just such an important part of healing, I think. So,
it was extraordinary. It just seeing yourself in their story and all the things, it just such a gift.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening. If you'd like to find out more about our podcast, or you have a great idea for a topic we've not covered, or just want to know a little bit more about, we'd love to hear from you. We want this podcast to have as many voices from across our community as possible. So if something's missing, or you just want a deeper dive on it, let us know. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram and LinkedIn. You can also become a member of our online community, which is a safe and inclusive space for anyone that's a member of the Childless community. More details are available on our website at www.thefullstoppod.com. You can also sign up to our listeners list at the website, which keeps you up to date on what we're up to. And if you'd like to, you can also donate to our work too. Remember, you're not alone.
So,
can I just say matching t-shirts?
I know. I didn't get the memo.
With like the grey gang. Shades. Oh no, shades of grey. on the t-shirt side, just to qualify that.
Larry's just getting some lighting together.
Oh, you got a production team over there, have you?
No. Don't pull a loose thread, because the whole thing is going to come. It's like things on things, So